So good evening, all of you. We are very excited to welcome you to the state rounds of the Indian Debating League. Point two, I'm Anjali. I'm helping you moderate. I'd love to sort of introduce first to you your adjudicator, Anushika Pokhriyal. She's gladly come to adjudicate over here, knowing the excitement that is on with the states competing with each other. The fact is that yesterday she was adjudicating in IIT Bombay, where she was given the second best adjudicator award. Otherwise, she's regular on the NLU circuit, again awarded the third best adjudicator there, is constantly an invited adjudicator. I'm just calling out a few of them. For example, in the Vocalize World School Debate Tournament and ISDS national team selections, which you all are very well aware of. So thank you so much, Anushika, for joining us to adjudicate this aggressive group of 10th to 12th graders. They are always my favorite when you to listen to debates. These are the teams of J&K and Karnataka. The motion for the round is quite interesting. This house would increase urbanization areas with high rural urban migration rates. The speeches are 6 minutes. I don't think I have to mention too many of the ground rules. They have to keep their cameras on. Anushika ma'am is going to be making sure that she's timekeeping for you as per your preference. No reply speeches this time. POIs first and the last minute are protected. And Anushika, over to you for any further ground rules that you might want to state.
Right. Hi, guys. My name is Anushika. I'll be adjudicating you guys for this round. You're already well versed with the motion. Just a few ground rules. Please do mention your preferred way of taking POIs right at the beginning of your speeches. Is it whether you want them to like verbally say POI and talk about the POI and unmute themselves, or do you want them to like put it in the chat like if they have a POI? So make sure that happens so that it's more convenient for you as speakers and like for them as somebody who wants to ask a question. Other than that, I think I'll be putting in the chat the timestamps at 1 and 5 so that you can know that your protected time has started. The protected time has ended, and then you have like a 5-minute window, and then you have 5 to 6 that you have a protected time. So I'll be giving you timestamps at 1 and 6, but I also highly encourage you guys to time yourselves so that it's convenient for you too. I don't think there's anything else left. If there are any concerns to be raised about the housekeeping rules of this debate, please do let me know right now. Seeing none, cool. So yeah, let's just begin with the debate. With this, without any further ado, I call upon the first speaker from side proposition to start up the debate for side proposition and not extending the time beyond 6 minutes, maintaining the order of the house. Here.
Good afternoon to respected speakers, honorable judges, and members of the opposition. Before we put forward our case today, I would like to define today's motion. This house would increase urbanization in areas with high rural-urban migration rates. I would like to specify that, number one, urbanization is defined as the process by which large numbers of people become permanently concentrated in relatively smaller areas, forming cities. It also includes the increase of industrialization. Number two, rural-urban migration is both a socioeconomic phenomenon and a spatial process involving the movement of people from rural areas to cities. Third, when we talk about urbanizing rural areas, we mean making available the pull factors, that is, services and necessities that are present in cities to rural areas. Given these definitions, we would like to offer the terms of the motion presented. Today, I, as the Prime Minister, will present one argument, that is equitable distribution of population and the benefits. We, the government, strongly believe in and for the motion. Members of the hall, imagine this. A husband and a wife leave their home in the village to move to the city in hope for a better life. They plan to bring the 2 kids once they settle. However, in the city, they struggle to get a job, and when they do, they are overworked and underpaid. They are forced to live in the slums where there is a shortage of water and the living conditions are unhygienic. They are trapped in a cycle of poverty, and the children back in the village also do not go on to get a good life just because the villages are not developed. Think about that. 100 years ago, only 20% of the world's population lived in urban areas, but the 20th century saw a dramatic shift that marked a turning point in history. Today, urbanization continues to grow around the world. According to the World Bank, city living is much more efficient in a variety of ways. It's easier to provide services when people live close together. However, overcrowding of these cities due to an increased rate of rural-urban migration causes a multiplicity of problems. In rural areas, one, the population structure is upset because of loss of young people. Two, fewer economically active people are left in the rural community. Three, families are split up while the elderly remain and death rate continues to increase. Four, there is a low rate of development and lack of infrastructural facilities. In urban areas, on the other hand, to where people migrate to, there is an increased pressure on places to reside in. What does this lead to? Social problems. Poor housing conditions inevitably lead to a dystopian trend where the immigrants end up in slums, which are nothing but the unmasked face of urbanized city. While the high-rise 27-storied buildings continue to house 5 members of a single rich family, we all know about the infamous Dharvi slums. Not everyone, and a remarkably minute number of people end up in Malabar Hills or Bandra. Most suffer from the unending traffic congestions and the water shortages of a middle-class locality, if not worse. There is also a pressure on the government when it comes to provisions for healthcare and education. Coming to the economic effect, we all know that what happens when there is an abundance of labor in cities or in industries. Low wages and poor working conditions follow. Exploitation of workers is inevitably caused. What does this lead to? A phenomenal rise in crime rates. These new city residents are faced with problems that do not exist in the countryside. Street crime, including gangs, as well as social inequality and discrimination. So what is the solution to all of this? Now, the proposition strongly believes that urbanized localities will cease to face these problems if rural areas are urbanized, developed, that is, to be developed with city-like facilities. There are 3 stakeholders in this case. 1, people currently living in urbanized cities. 2, people living in rural areas. And 3, immigrants or potential immigrants. 1, people living in cities that are urbanized will stop having economic and social and environmental problems caused due to overcrowding of immigrants in cities. They will also have a decreased competition, which will lead to comparatively higher wages. It will also make it easier for them to get jobs in the market. 2, people living in rural areas will immensely benefit from the various developmental activities that will pave way to urbanization. An increased number of schools, establishment of hospitals equipped with latest technology will increase their standard of living. Agriculture will also benefit due to mechanization and increased utility coupled with markets in proximity. The opposition may say that mechanization of agriculture is what led to people migrating from rural to urban areas. However, the proposition reiterates the fact that there is an abundance of disguised unemployment in the agricultural sector, and that mechanization of agriculture will only lead to more potential and fruitful results. Thirdly, immigrants or potential immigrants. With the setting up of industries in large commercial trade centers in rural areas, there will be an increase in demand for labor. Hence, they can get jobs easily too. Going back to the scenario I had previously cited, the 2 children will get good quality of education in the village. Hence, potential immigrants will refrain from leaving their family behind because they will be getting the exact same facility right in their rural hometowns. Now, coming to my argument as a conclusion. Equitable distribution of benefits and population. That is because it will not only lead to development of rural areas, increased standard of living of the people there, but also prevent urbanized cities from being overcrowded and facing the dire consequences of the same that I have previously explained. This will subsequently lead to adequate development of both cities and rural areas, and hence the country as an aggregate. Thank you.
Great. I thank the first speaker for those kind statements. Once again, reminding everyone to state their preferred method of taking POIs, so it's more convenient for the speaker as well as the person who wants to ask the POI. With that, let me just call upon the first speaker from side opposition to start off the case for side opposition. Here.
So I'll take the POIs from chat. Should I start?
Yep. Give me a countdown and I'll start the timer for you.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Hello and good evening. What? Hello and good evening, respected chair and fellow debaters. Karnataka does observe a rural to urban migration. For example, Bellary to Bangalore. However, I stand in front of you against the motion this house would increase urbanization in areas with high rural-urban migration rates. This debate is not about all people living in urban areas. That is, it isn't about the people native to urban areas. Instead, it's about those people who migrated to urban areas from rural areas. People migrate for three reasons: employment in tertiary sector. This does not stand true in the status quo anymore because people now have the provision to WFH for tertiary sector jobs, given access to dongles and internet facilities. Therefore, we aren't focusing on them. Second, marriage. Women largely migrate from rural to urban areas to settle with their husbands as a consequence of patriarchy, and it isn't burden in the debate. Thus, we exclude them. Third, social status. In the status quo, a large portion of people migrate to urban areas for the prestigious tag of belonging to an urban city. And these are the people we are focusing in the debate. Urbanization is the process of making an area more urban. What makes a urban area urban is commercial buildings, high population density, and advanced technology. Now, when urbanization takes place in rural areas, it will have negative effects. When urbanization takes place in rural areas, these rural areas lose their cultural essence. Rural areas such as villages are the epicenter for culture and tradition. Life in urban areas is quite individualistic, while in villages, it's far more community oriented. This can lead to an identity crisis among villagers from rural areas. Urbanization in rural areas can lead to a loss of the cultural essence in these rural areas. Furthermore, farming is a profession mostly done by people in rural areas. Urbanization will result in alteration of green space and destruction of farms, which in turn results in farmers losing their job. Is this fair to the farmers? Urbanization in rural areas will also bring advancement in technologies. But it is important to understand that the villagers in rural areas may not always be educated and well equipped to take advantage of these advancements. These advancements in technology will just baffle the villagers of the rural areas. Can villagers really take advantage of these advancements? Rural areas are known for their green and clean environment because of their farms and wildlife. Urbanization in rural area uh, would result in the building of commercial buildings and factories. This would destroy the ecology present in rural areas. Is urbanization in rural areas worth destroying the ecology and wildlife present? Furthermore, urbanization invites MNCs into rural areas. Now, domestic/local markets will be dismantled as they stand no chance in the monopolized market. Adding on, urbanization in rural areas can lead to an increase in cost of goods and services, and this will result in a high cost of living. Urbanization may be important, but as mentioned above, it has negative impact on rural areas. Rather than trying and urbanizing rural areas, fix the loopholes that exist in the system. It is for the above reasons mentioned why I feel like even if there might be a fundamental need and a problem with the current state of migration and other factors that might lead the government into wanting the urbanized rural areas, the opposition strongly thinks that the action or the move that the government has to take is incorrect, and a solution like this will only create more problems. Therefore, rendering the outcome of the solution to urbanized rural areas is irrelevant and useless. Thank you.
Great. I thank the first speaker from side opposition for those fine statements. Now I call upon the second speaker from side proposition to further the case beside government. Here.
Am I audible and visible?
Yep, loud and clear.
I will take the POIs in chat. So yeah, beginning.
Just give me a count.
First of all, I would like to thank the opposition speaker for their speech. Meanwhile, as it's well said by the ex-Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh, that urbanization is the inevitable outcome of the processes of growth and process of modernization. Good evening, debaters, panelists, and all other spectators and listeners. Today, I, as a Deputy Prime Minister from Team Proposition, would like to establish the fact that why we should be focusing on increasing the urbanization in rural areas where the rural migration rates are high, and why these migration rates are high, and how can we done that in an eco-friendly manner. Before moving on, I would like to ask everyone present here to picture the story. See, there is a farmer in a village, in a very far-flung village with poor facilities, poor infrastructure, and any other things. The farmer lives with his wife, but unfortunately, his wife meets an accident, and in order to save her, she needs fast hospital assistance, but she couldn't get just because hospital is far away from the village. So in sorrow, just because losing his wife, in sorrow, the farmer regrets the fact that why does he live in a place where there are poor health services, poor infrastructure, and other things. He realizes that he might have been able to save his wife if he lived in a urban area where they are provide better health service and other things. So the point is that the woman would have been saved if she would have taken to the hospital on the right time, but the hospital wasn't nearby, so she couldn't be taken. So we came to conclude that areas where the situation is same, where the problem is there are poor health structure, there is poor infrastructure, urbanization is the need of the hour. And before moving further ahead, I would like to re-imply the fact and add also established by the Prime Minister from the Team Proposition that here we strictly talk about increasing urbanization in those areas where rural urban migration is high, because rural urban migration might seem an inevitable component of development process, but it has consequences and limitations and implications on its own. And I will come to those in a moment. But first, as the opposition speaker mentioned that unemployment nowadays is not a problem because some of sort of internet service, but that's just on papers. In practicality, if you can see, I will just give the example of Jammu and Kashmir, more specifically of Kashmir. The Srinagar city is a city which has become the education hub and hub of many job opportunities. People from far-flung areas, from border village like district of Farah, where I belong, people from there move to the cities like Srinagar just in order to find employment, just in order to find jobs. And moreover, the opposition mentioned that education, the farmers are not educated, the most people are not educated. How will they access the technology and advancement? If you're not allowing urbanization, how can they be allowed to get access to better education? Srinagar city has been overpopulated from past few years just because the migration of people from many other districts to Srinagar city, which has caused a lot of problems over here. Moreover, they also mentioned that it does affect the agrarian economy, but I would like to establish the fact that urbanization does not mean the environmental degradation. Urbanization can be done in a eco-friendly way and an environmentally friendly way, and I will explain that in my second argument. Moving ahead, as they said that they see urbanization only has negative impacts, but let me tell you that things that has pros also has cons. So the urbanization does have cons, but I think the pros of the urbanization gets heavy on the cons of the urbanization. Moving ahead, I would like to establish that why the rural urban migration is a problem and what are the problems related to it. Why can't we let people migrate? What are the reasons? Because definitely people prefer better life and job opportunities created by the industrialization attract the surplus labor of the rural areas. While attracting the surplus labor of the rural areas lose the human resources of theirs. And in order to seek higher employment, in order to seek higher salaries to employment and employment sector, people tend to move to industrial sectors. People tend to move to cities and migrate to cities. Well, it might be considered as an inevitable outcome of development process, though it has a broader range of consequences and implications. Just look at this. If people are migrating from rural areas to urban areas, there is a lack of human resource. The rural areas are losing its human resource. Population increase, there are a lot of problems in with this migration factor, just because there are population increase in cities. There is overcrowding, there are traffic conjunctions, there is when people move to when there are a lot of people concentrated only in one place, there is development of slums, there is water and sanitation problem, and urban crime rates get increased, and there are many lot of problems. Moreover, we have to also establish the fact that the population distribution should be equal throughout the country. So what are the solutions to all these problems that I already mentioned? Well, there might be a bunch of solutions, but the most reliable one is urbanizing these areas where the rural urban migration is high. So this house believes that urbanization in rural areas, urbanizing rural areas plays a catalyst role for the rural development, and and it's a major way to tackle with all the migration problems. We think by urbanizing rural areas, we are allowing the areas to get more access to opportunities. We are allowing those areas to develop more economically, socially, politically, mileage, just as similar to that of the cities and towns. Moreover, urbanization does not only help in migration problems tackling, but it also helps in generating the economy. See, if we are developing an infrastructure some over there, we can also, if that infrastructure became a attraction, became a tourist attraction, and eventually leading to generation of tourism, which will eventually lead to generate the economy of the country. And we can't deny the fact that how the team opposition is denying the fact that if the India wants to be the world's largest economy, it has to be urbanized, it has to get well infrastructure. And moreover, as they mentioned that urbanization, as urbanization creates environmental degradation, but it does not, as urbanization can be done in eco-friendly manners by infrastructure going on barren lands, and if on one hand we are creating urbanization, on the other hand we can also go by forest area. So that's all I have to say. I rest my case here. Thank you so much.
Great. I thank the second speaker from side proposition for those fine statements. Now I call upon the second speaker from side opposition to further the case of their side. Here.
Yes, ma'am, just give me a minute. Yeah. So my preferred pronouns are she, her, and I prefer to take POIs verbally. And I would begin in 3, 2, and 1. So proposition largely characterizes rural areas as places with low healthcare facilities, with zero unemployment, and as if a third world country where people struggle to even survive. And we think that's highly uncharitable, because in the status quo, rural areas do have a certain amount of the basic necessities that are required. Say, for example, they do have a government hospital, they do have schools for survival, and they do have provisions for grocery and etc. So that was to clear the characterization. Secondly, they talk about the lack of employment over here. So firstly, we already clarified in our PM speech that the population that we're talking about right now is about those people who migrated to urban areas for social status. So in the first place itself, why are you trying to force someone who has gone to an urban place for social status? They would resent coming back to these rural areas, and when you eventually force them, they would go on and they would try to participate in events such as strikes and curfews and etc., which would lead to collateral damage. Secondly, when you bring these people back to rural areas, as in your world, let's see what happens. So these people have already attained a certain sense of social status over there. So when they come back, they again want to replicate that kind of a social status. So then it becomes a necessity for them to occupy them over there, to construct facilities that adjust to their needs, such as having a swimming pool, while in the first place, the rural area does not have enough access to drinking water, or having a golf court where the farmers over here struggle to graze their cattle, right? Secondly, what happens? So children in those urban areas had access to private schools, and they were trained under the best of the best teachers over there. So when those children come over here, the children who were previously studied in rural areas become highly disadvantaged. Why? Because now a child in Bellary attends a school in plain or oddly fitting clothes, while all of these children who came from urban areas, if they're wearing like Gucci shirts and sneakers, so this kid is likely to be signaled out. So right now, the child who was obtaining education in these rural areas is being sent out, and that largely affects their education in itself. And it creates an inferior complex for them, because now these students have a higher academic advantage, while these rural children don't have it in the first place. Second, we again told you about our model of how people go there for social status. But then secondly, it's required for this house to understand that there are two types of laborers, skilled and unskilled. So these skilled people are largely participating in the tertiary sector activities. But that's not what this debate is all about, because if these people even need to come back, we already told you that they do have the provision to work from home because of the given internet facilities. But then what's more problematic is that now you focus on employing the unskilled laborers also in the tertiary sector, which then brings up your problem of exploiting these workers. That is, now a worker who could have better performed in a primary or a secondary sector is now being forced to work in a tertiary sector where they don't have the relevant skill or the experience, and that is why they have to undergo poor working conditions with lower wages. While what we are trying to propose is that these people already have the skill to work in primary and secondary sectors, so why not improve these sectors itself so that they have better provisions to work inside, rather than only focusing on urbanization and bringing in tertiary sectors, which isn't what the rural people require in the first place itself. And that's also not what the urban people are wanting, because in the first place, they don't want to come here. Secondly, they talk about the sectors of economy. Okay, I'll take the POI.
Yeah, thanks. So, there is difference between education and better education. So if you mentioned that rural areas have access to education, but they do not have access to better education. If they had access to better education, why do students move to different cities to attain education, like cities like Srinagar and Kota? Can you please clarify that?
Okay, so in our status quo, students do have access to basic education, while in your model, when you bring in these students, they are denied of that access because of the inferior complex that they do generate. So however, we will explain eventually about how we build efficient education models. Moving on, they talk about how urbanizing improves the sectors of the economy. Now, panel, it's important for this house to understand that a large portion of India's economy depends on its primary sector, that is the agricultural sector. While if you bring in all of these sectors, where will farmers grow their crops? Where will we get agriculture from? And how will the people even have food on their tables in India? When you get all of these, we lose out on the precious land that we have for agriculture. And secondly, because rural areas have so much of land, that's where all of the secondary sector activities happen. That is production units and manufacturing units. So now that provision is no more obtained. So therefore, their argument on improving sectors of the economy is clearly ruled out over here. Secondly, they talk about tourism. Now, panel, it's important to understand that there are urban areas all over the world. But then why do people come for tourism? After all that they've seen, they want to see green fields. They want to see beautiful village life. And when you urbanize it, they are denied of all that happens to them. And largely, they do not talk about how are they going to get the capital for all of this urbanization. Their model clearly does not explain that. Urbanization requires a large amount of capital, and we've seen in Labasa in Maharashtra how that clearly failed when they tried to urbanize the place, but then eventually when the political systems changed, they got ruled out. Now that place, which is previously a rural area, when it tried to become an urban place, it clearly failed, and now it's not even a rural area, it's not even an urban area, it has been a ghosted city. So for these reasons, we're clearly proud to oppose.
Cool. I thank the speaker for those fine statements. And this is just a general reminder for everyone that post the 5th minute, it's the protected time for each speaker. No POIs will be entertained. With that, I call upon the third speaker, which is the last speaker from side proposition, to finish up their side of the case. I think I would prefer if you were a little louder.
Right, how is it now?
Yeah, cool.
Fine. So I would start on the count of 3. 1,
POI
2.
preference. Please do tell what you.
Yeah, so I would prefer POIs in the chat box. And I would start on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, panel. So greetings to you all. The structure of my speech is somewhat going to be like, I will first summarize the case presented by our side. Then I'll be rebutting all the remaining unrebutted points made by the opposition. And at last, I'll be drawing a very precise comparison between our world and the opposition's world. So basically, what we're trying to assert is that when we bring urbanization in rural areas, we are simply trying to distribute the population evenly. We are not stressing the population only in the urban areas. Now, what will this lead to? This will lead to the equal access and better access to the rural people as well, while urban people will also not be deprived of any resource. All right. Now we talked about the social crimes. Yes, the social crimes do occur when people are living in inhumane conditions. As our DPM talked about, that the insanitation conditions and the lack of human resources. Basically, what we're trying to assert is that when urbanization arrives in rural area, people are better able to live there and they are not forced to live in inhumane conditions. Now, as I already talked about the better access to resources, well, the LO talked about the loss of cultural essence. If we do not bring urbanization to rural areas, the rural people will definitely move to the urban areas. Then, who is going to hold the cultural essence and who is going to follow the traditions when there is nobody left in the community, when there is nobody left in the village? Because if we do not provide resources to the people of rural areas, they are definitely going to move out and nobody will be there to hold on the essence, to follow the traditions, and hence the culture would definitely extinguish. Then he talked about alteration of agriculture. So basically, the opposition has mistaken the urbanization to as bringing up of tertiary sector. No, that's not. We can mechanize the agriculture subjects and we can better it only. It doesn't mean that we are leading towards towards destroying the agriculture. Then he talked about that people in rural areas are not well educated. Well, 100 years back, people in India were not introduced to internet and tertiary services, but right now we are dealing with it. So if only we bring urbanization to the rural areas, people of rural areas are made to face the internet, they will better be able to learn it. They will not be left uneducated. They will learn things only. Then he talked about the loss of greenery. So basically, what would happen is that if we will balance the urbanization, urban areas will not be suffocated. No industries will be built aggressively if urbanization takes place in the rural areas as well. What this would lead to is that people basically would not move from rural areas move to the urban areas, and therefore no force on the urban land would be caused. Then he talked about the domestic and local markets. So basically, yes, I understood. Yes, I understand that arrival of monopolies of MNCs would definitely affect loss of the local markets and domestic markets. So basically, what would happen is that if people will be more having the basic resources, they would better be able to live. And yes, we can compromise upon the local markets if people are able to live peacefully. So that is what I had to say. Now, basically, panel, what would happen is that in our world, people will be having better resources. They would be able to lead a peaceful life. While in the opposition's world, rural people will be left unskilled, uneducated, and will be left to live in an inhumane condition. And then also the DLO talked about rural areas having schools. So basically, have you ever seen a person living in urban area moving to the rural area to get healthcare? No, but rural people do move to urban areas. If the urban areas healthcare facilities would have been better, they would not have chosen to do so. So with this, what I conclude is that healthcare facilities present in the rural areas are not sufficient. So you cannot say that they're already having all the resources. That's what, yes, I would take the POI.
So the healthcare facilities that would be developed in these rural areas would be adjusted to the needs of the urban people. How do you think a common man from the rural area would be able to afford this expensive healthcare?
Right. So when we bring urbanization, we are not solely focusing upon the healthcare facilities, isn't it? So when people will be facing all the urbanization, they would be better facing all the employment facilities, and if they will be earning, they will be working in better conditions. They will be having better work. They will be having better wages. Definitely, they will be able to afford the healthcare facilities, because not only healthcare facilities are available, in despite that, moreover, other employment options will also be available. So basically, panel, in our world, people are able to live peacefully with all the resources which they will be equipped with. Therefore, I believe that in our world, it will be better for people to live. While in the opposition's world, people will always be made to live in the lack of resources, and they will always have to migrate to other places to get the fulfillment of their resources. Therefore, I believe that we should win this debate because we have properly fulfilled the need of the motion that in our world people are able to live at least with all the resources in front of them. So that's all. Thank you.
Great. I thank the government speaker for those fine statements, and I thank them for finishing up the debate from side government. Now I call upon the op whip to finish up the case for side opposition and also finish up this debate. Thank you. Here.
I would be wanting POIs verbally set out, like you can unmute and say POI. I'll count down from 3 and we can start. 3, 2, 1, go. Hello and good evening, respected chair and fellow debaters. I would be the whip for the opposition. After a long and lengthy argument, I firmly believe that our side, the opposition, opposing the ideas of urbanization in rural areas, has won the debate. I would like to categorically break down each argument and point out why we have won this debate. Firstly, I would like to talk about the cultural impact. By urbanizing a rural area, we lose on a lot of cultural factors, making a rural area important. Rural areas often have deep cultural ideas and values embedded in them. This is because of the tightly knit community that they are part of. There are cultural roots in rural areas, which if were to be urbanized, would lose these roots. Although these roots might not be prevalent in an urban area, often people living in urban areas tie back to a rural area, making the preservation of these areas very important. Along with this, the people who are largely used to a rural life, which might include women, children, and elderly, because they are not the ones migrating to urban areas, these people would face an identity crisis. They have lost all meaning as to who they are, when their culture and tradition are diluted by urbanization. Next, I would like to talk about the ecological impact. The other main point that I would like to address that the government made is the ecological impact. By definition, a rural area is separated from an urban area by a green space or a green patch that are integral to the sustainability and ecological factors like air quality index of urban areas. Often the air and high levels of pollution that are created by urban areas are carried outwards into rural areas, where this air is cleaned and carried back towards urban areas, allowing these urban areas to be habitable. By urbanizing these rural areas, we do not allow the cleaning of this air process to take place, which has a large ecological impact on urban areas. We also lose out on flora and fauna, which might have considered the rural area their home, pushing them towards extinction. Also, what do you mean by no industries? Your third speaker, the whip, had mentioned that there will be no industries in these urban areas. The whole point of urbanization is to bring about industries in a place. When we say industries, we automatically mean that we will be taking space and compromising on the sustainability of an idea. Therefore, what you said is logically incorrect and contradicts itself. Also, farmers are key to this world. We literally need food to survive. Farming needs a lot of space. If we urbanize these large rural areas, make them into mega cities, we lose this space, which is replaced by urban buildings and urban facilities. If we lose this key space to farm, how will we be able to produce the food that we need to survive? Also, the proposition said that we will need to urbanize so that farmers can start working for higher paying jobs. But how will they work for these jobs if in the first place they do not have the skills for these jobs? If we immediately bring about an urban change in a rural area, the farmers are unskilled laborers who will not be able to cope with the new job opportunities that have been presented to them. Also, I would like to point out that you contradicted yourself. You said you are focusing on the healthcare, and then you said that's not what you are focusing on. Also, as our opposition deputy leader of opposition mentioned, people would not have the education, the skills to be able to work for the new opportunities that you supposedly said would be available to them and to afford that same healthcare. You did not say that the healthcare would be cheaper. You said that the people would be able to earn enough to afford the healthcare. But we are clearly saying that the people who are currently living in rural areas do not have the skills or education to be able to afford that healthcare. The proposition has also mentioned human resources, wherein human resources migrate outwards into the urban areas. and why this is bad for, and why this is because of this, rural areas lose on a lot of men who are integral to the economy of their area. I would like to point out that the rural economy actually gets boosted because people are gaining money in the urban areas, sending it back to the rural areas and putting it in the rural area economy system, where the money will be spent in rural areas, boosting the economy of a rural area as a whole. Also, what makes you think that crime would not be a problem when you are urbanizing a rural area? I would also like to point out that the motion says increasing the urbanization in rural areas. This does not mean that we are against the natural urbanization of rural areas, where better technologies would help people with primary and secondary jobs. We are just against the forced urbanization that would cause a multiple primary and secondary sector workers to switch to tertiary sectors, wherein we would lose key natural resources and food and other such integral resources that are key to our life. Next, I would like to talk about migration. As pointed out by the government, migration is one of the key problems and reasons as to why someone would urbanize a rural area. But when one logically thinks about it, there is no problem with migration itself. There is a problem with the systems in place that are meant to accommodate the large number of migrants. If we fix these problems that include bad housing, bad transport, and other problems that makes it an inconvenience to migrate, leading the government to suggest a solution that has to do with the urbanization of rural areas, if we fix and address these problems locally in the urban area, then by improving the public transport, making better and cheaper housing available, then there is no fundamental need for the move or action that the government are taking, and therefore rendering their outcome irrelevant. It is for the above reasons mentioned why I feel even if there might be a fundamental need and a problem with the current state of migration and other factors that might lead in the government into wanting to urbanize rural areas, the opposition strongly thinks that the actions or the move that the government is taking is incorrect, and a solution like this will only create more problems, therefore rendering the outcome of the solution to urbanize rural areas irrelevant and useless. Thank you.
Great. I thank the last speaker for those fine statements. Now, since all of the speakers are done, I thank all of you guys for something that was a great debate, really insightful points made. I'd take 5 minutes, if that's all right by everyone, to fill in your scores, submit the ballots, gather my thoughts, gather my notes, and then I'll present you guys with an OA, which will be a reason for my decision and everything. So, stay here, I guess. I hope we do have a moderator in the room.
Yes, we will wait for 5 minutes for you to deliver away.
Oh, cool. So are you like a moderator or are you like observer? I'm not sure.
Oh, I'm here to moderate. It's just
great.
the name.
Cool. Fine. I'll just take 5 minutes. Thank you. Oh, cool. I just need a verbal confirmation. Are all your teammates here? I'm ready with my OA.
Yes, ma'am. Side opposition is here.
Lovely. Side proposition, just a verbal confirmation.
Yeah, we are here.
Okay, cool. So let's begin with it then. Starting my OA in 3, 2, 1. Great. So here's what the structure of my OA is going to look like. I am going to give you guys a verdict, the verdict that I have come on to after watching the debate, analyzing your points. Then I'll give you a margin. I cannot give you the score margin, but I'll give you a range of margin between the losing side and the winning side. Then I'll talk about some individual flashes. And lastly, and something that is more important, I think, for young debaters as yourself, I'll give some general comments on this debate, general comments as to how we could get better. And after my verdict, the first thing I'll tell you is what are my thoughts and observations through this debate. And by the end, I'll try to take as many questions as possible, but I'll also put my number up in the chat so you guys can shoot up any questions beyond this motion, or in this motion as well, whatever suits you. So yeah, here's what my OA starts now. So here is the verdict. I think the motion stands. The government takes the debate, and the government takes the debate by a very close margin. And what do I mean by close margin? What do I mean by close to clear margin? This means that both the sides had some amount of rebuttal thrown around each other, but why the side government takes it over the side opposition, or why side proposition takes it, is because their rebuttals were better able to negate the arguments of side opposition as compared to the rebuttals of side opposition, which were able to largely mitigate the arguments, but the arguments still stood because there was a greater level of analysis. And I'll come on to analysis more when I'm talking about the general comments. Now, here are my thoughts about this debate. This was a good debate in terms of analyzing what are the impacts and like what are the impacts of urbanization and rural urban migration. I'll just call it migration for now. Please just understand that I mean rural urban migration. What are the analyzing what are the impacts of like urbanization of rural areas as compared in comparison to like what are the impacts of migration. But what it severely lagged is what do these processes, these two processes, since this was a binary debate with two things in existence, one being urbanization and one being migration, it lagged in telling me what do these processes actually look like. I, as an adjudicator, cannot assume or cannot be expected to assume to know what these processes look like. So a large part of both, or the starting of both of your cases, should have talked about what do these processes look like, right? And what, not just what do these look like, what do these look like, and what tangible impacts do they have on the like individual and collective lives of the stakeholders in this debate. Cool. So since this was a binary debate, a comparison was necessary, and all of your cases, all 6 speeches, should necessarily run on a comparison. That is to say, it is perfectly reasonable for me to believe that urbanization is good in isolation and migration is also good in isolation, both at the same time. What I need in this debate is for your side to tell me, hey, urbanization is good, rural migration might also be good, but here are the reasons why urbanization is better. Like why stakeholders are better off in a paradigm where urbanization exists, or why stakeholders are better off in a paradigm where migration exists. So that is where the debate comes into play, because if two things that are good in isolation, I don't think there's any scope of debate. But when you talk about which one is better than the other, and you compare the impacts, you compare like the things that they bring to the status quo, I think that is where you actually bring substance to the debate. So I think both the sides largely spent a huge amount of time talking about why one thing is good and why other thing is good, and very so significantly late in all the speeches did I find out why one thing is better than the other, right? Let's just talk about clashes now. Let's just talk about the burdens that both the side had in the eyes of an average reasonable voter. So in a debate that says this house would increase urbanizations in areas with high rural and urban migration rates, I think the burden here is government needs to come up and tell me two things. A, what are the exclusive benefits that come out of urbanization to stakeholders? And B, on a comparison, why is urbanization so much better than rural urban migration? And that comes in the form of impacts, like impact analysis, impacts on the stakeholders, impact on status quo comparison, all of those things. That is something we'll discuss further. Secondly, what side op had to do is come to me and tell me a counterfactual as to why status quo is better off without urbanization of rural areas, and B, what are the exclusive benefits that are mostly come out of, or like mostly derived out of rural urban migration, which are so exclusive that it cannot really be replicated by the urbanization of a rural area, right? So these are the things that you needed to prove to me. Now, I'll give a justification as to why side opposition did not take the debate for me over side proposition. So here's what it is, right? You come and tell me about why urban areas are urban, and you give me a really good example. You give me like really good reasons why people migrate, and I think that was some really good ground setting wherein you tell me that people migrate for various reasons, and I think that can be considered as a stakeholder analysis. But if at all you want to give me a stakeholder analysis, you have to talk a little bit more about who exactly your stakeholders are, how are their lives affected, and what impacts do they suffer or like enjoy in like both the paradigms. See, you come and tell me that rural areas will lose their cultural essence, and you need to like give me an, I understand as someone who knows things that why is it necessarily bad, but what I cannot do here is give you score for something I know. You have to come and tell me why is it necessarily bad, and what are these cultural aspects that will get lost off. Because when you say cultural essence or like the rural essence, it could, as much as it could mean the good things that happen in the rural area, it can also mean the bad things, so like the orthodox things such as patriarchy, misogyny, child marriage, and all the bad things that exist in rural areas, because that, as sad as it is also a part of their culture, and they would lose it if they move on to like some other place. So you need to tell me, why is it necessarily bad that they lose their cultural essence if there is urbanization? So yeah, and then at the face of it, you tell me that urban areas are individualistic. On that as well, you need to give me a clear analysis as to why the individualism of urban areas or like urbanization is necessarily bad when compared to the collectivism of rural areas, right? Cool, right. Then again, so I think one of my major problems with the arguments so provided in the first half of the speeches is there was a lack of analysis. I'll talk more on it as to why analysis is important and how does analysis play out in arguments. I think a very strong point that you talked to me about did need more analysis, but I think it stands very clearly on my sheets, is how urbanization will be unfair to farmers and villages who are not equipped to cope and access the techie advancements that urbanization is going to bring about. I think a little more analysis on it, a little more like surety or exclusivity as to why this would necessarily happen would make your like argument more clear, and your argument it would make your argument something that cannot be refuted by the other side. This could happen if you give me a clear characterization of who these villagers are, how they are someone who lack like educational capital, social capital, someone who has been deprived of these things for so long that they're beyond any scope of like learning technology or learning urbanization. So that is where you can tell me that urbanization does not work for them as good as moving somewhere else does. Cool. Then some other strong points that you give me is how tech and urbanization will destroy ecology, which I'm able to buy, but I think a greater level of analysis would do this argument more justice. I did see it in the further speeches, and I've credited both the speeches like enough for that. But I think, see, my problem with it was like a lack of analysis. Then I think one more thing that I expect from side opposition, which I also expect in like every debate, is if you're telling me that something is bad, for example, if you're telling me that urbanization is bad, you need to necessarily tell me what is alternatively good, right? So you give me an alternative that instead of urbanization, we should fix the problems within rural areas. And like we should like bring reformation from within. So I think a greater level of analysis on the alternative, because alternative is what your case stands on, would work better for your side. Cool. Then the second speech I hear about how rural areas, like proposition talking about how rural areas are facility-less places, and rural, like you calling how it's uncharitable for them to characterize rural areas that way, and how rural areas do have facilities of their own. My problem with this argument is, I understand the gravity of it, and I understand what you're trying to say here. My problem with that is that if you are agreeing that rural areas are self-sufficient within themselves, your support of rural-urban migration stands to be weaker. It makes your stance sound like it's pro or like in support of staying right where they are for these villages. I think other points made, such as social status and the urbanization being harmful to kids because they'll be singled out, I think those are strong points which were unrefuted, and I think you've gotten credit for it. My problem, like another enough like analysis issue that comes up with it, is unskilled laborers work better in primary sector, and how they would be at a disadvantage because like basically urbanization is just going to bring about a tertiary revolution in the rural areas, and these unskilled laborers are going to be either unemployed or exploited, like at low wages. I understand that point. What my problem here is that there is not enough analysis in proving to me how urbanization is necessarily what takes away the safety net of employment from these unskilled laborers. I understand that this is an impact, that unskilled laborers might go unemployed, but I do not understand, and I do not really like get enough analysis as to why is it an exclusive impact of urbanization. Are there not other factors that lead to the unemployment? Like this guy's unemployment still exists in rural areas. So that is enough an analysis on why urbanization might not be an exclusive cause of this unemployment. So I think there, if you gave me like a greater level of analysis as to why technology will replace people, and like only the people who have had some sort of privilege in the rural areas would have better facilities, all of those things, I think that would have been like a greater sort of analysis given to this argument, and that would have made this argument stronger. Again, when you talk to me how Indian economy is dependent on primary sector, and like an erosion of primary sector would occur out of urbanization of rural areas, there is not enough analysis as to why there exists an exclusive correlation between urbanization and the death of primary sector. I know the reasons why that exists, but if I got it from your speeches, I think that would be like a greater point, and like a more well-founded argument, because I wouldn't have to assume anything for that. So whenever you correlate two things, make sure that the analysis you provide for that correlation is A, like multi-layered, and B, exclusive. That is that this is the only analysis that exists for this particular correlation. Cool. And like a general word of advice, that when you question that where would the money for urbanization come from, there is something called the gov fiat in these debates. That is to say that when there's a motion that says that we would increase urbanization in areas of high rural urban migration, there is an assumption that if at all there is a policy that like this that happens, it will exist, it can happen. That is a fiat on gov. Opposition cannot come and say that this policy cannot happen. You can come and tell me that this policy will be like disadvantageous, will have harmful effects for the stakeholders, and in general it's going to be ineffective in bringing the good outcomes that the proposition is talking about. What you cannot do is come and say that this policy will not happen because of these reasons, because there is an assumption in debates that the policy will happen. Your job as the opposition is to tell me that the policy's impacts will be detrimental or ineffective, however you want to like frame the debate. Great. So I think I got like a really, really strong point in the last speech from the side opposition. But I think if you read up more on what the roles of a particular speaker is, you would understand that in a whip speech, no new point can come around. It's called a whip dump if you like fill in some information that was not spoken in the speeches before you. So I think even if you make the best point so far in the entire debate, I cannot really credit you for that, because it came too late in the debate, and it's unfair for the other side because they cannot rebut it now. That is why like gov whip or op whip, both of those rules are like pretty much like they're not allowed, or like they're not permitted to bring in any new material. What you have to do is give me a summary, give me like weighing of both the sides and rebuttals if needed. And even those rebuttals should not really be consistent of any new information. I think the strong point that was brought about by government opposition whip was how side opposition is not against urbanization, it's only against forced urbanization. So the natural urbanization still exists, and that makes it, you know, that makes it look like the holistic case wherein both the sides are that is the first example of a comparative debate that I got from side opposition, wherein they talked about how, you know, in the face of urbanization, why rural urban migration is still better. Cool. So these were the reasons why op did not take it over gov for me. If there are any questions at this point, I'd be happy to entertain them. Or if they're not, and if there's something you guys want to like ask me in personal about debates or like debates beyond this very motion, I'd be happy to answer them. Cool. So
could I get some feedback as the third?
Yeah, I think for individual feedback, I've already lapsed my time. I'm not sure how much time do I have left for this oral adjudication. If the moderators could like tell me about it, because I've already lapsed like 15 minutes.
You can give the individual feedback. The one who need feedback, they can stay, and other can leave.
Great. So I think I did not do it in the last round, so I was not sure if individual feedback is something